everybody. In this video, we're going to talk about two models that you can use to help your students understand the process of multiplying integers. So when you multiply integers, there's these two patterns that students will often just memorize without really understanding the reason why these patterns exist. So the two patterns are that if you multiply numbers with the same signs, whether it's a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative, if the two numbers have the same signs, then you end up with a positive result. And if you multiply two numbers with opposite signs, like a negative times a positive or a positive times a negative, then the products will be negative. And again, it's important to help your students understand why these patterns exist rather than just having them memorize the patterns. So, my favorite model for helping students understand this is a set model where you use objects to represent positives and negatives. And remember that the positive and negative pairs will always equal zero. And when you multiply by a positive, you're going to think of it as adding multiple groups of whatever number you're multiplying by. And if you multiply by a negative number, that's going to be thought of as taking away multiple groups of the number you're multiplying by. So, for example, if I was doing 2 times 3, the way that I would think about this is that I'm going to be adding 3 groups, and each group is going to have 2 positives in it. And so when I add those 3 groups of 2 positives, that gives me an overall amount of 6 positives. And similarly, if I was doing -2 times 3, I'm going to think about it as adding 3 groups, and each group has 2 negatives. And that gives me a result of -6. And notice in both of these problems, we were multiplying by a +3, which is why I was adding the 3 groups of either positives or negative numbers. But because it was +3 that I was multiplying by, that means that I'm going to be adding groups to my circle. If you multiply by a negative, then in that case, we're going to be taking away groups. So in this case, we're going to be taking away 3 groups of 2 positives. And in order to be able to take away the 3 groups of 2 positives, I need to have some positives in my circle to start with. But I want my overall amount in the circle to start as 0. So I'm going to have to include some positive and negative pairs. So I'm just going to draw a whole bunch of positives and then also pair them with negatives. And basically what this does is it makes it so that the amount of, or the number, I guess, that's represented in the circle is 0 to start with, but it gives me some positives that I can take away when I want to take away 3 groups of 2 positives. So I start off with 0, then I'm going to take away 3 groups where each group is taking away 2 positives. And when I do that, what I'm left with are 6 negatives that no longer are paired with positives, so they don't equal 0. And that's why 2 times -3 equals -6. And then if you want to do a negative times a negative, it's going to be very similar, where we're taking away 3 groups of -2. But again, we have to start off with 0 to start with. So just include a bunch of positives and negatives here. And every positive is paired with a negative to start with because we want to start with 0. And then I'm going to take away 3 groups of 2. So when I take away these 3 groups of 2 negatives each, what I'm left with are 6 positives that no longer have pairs. And so that's why a -2 times a -3 equals a +6, because I'm taking away 3 groups of 2 negatives, which leaves 6 positives that are unpaired. So that's how you can model the multiplication of integers with a set model. And you can also do a number line model. So in a number line model, you can have the first number represent the number of forward and backward steps. So forward steps if it's a positive number, backward steps if it's a negative number. And then the second number will be how many groups of those steps you'll be taking. And the positive or negative of that number will determine whether you're facing the positive direction of the number line or the negative direction of the number line. So if I multiply two positive numbers with this model, since I have a positive 4, that means I'm going to be taking groups of 4 steps forward. And the positive 2 means that I'm going to be facing the positive side of the number line, and I'm specifically going to take two groups of those 4 steps forward. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to be facing the positive side of the number line because it was a positive 2. And I'm going to take two groups of 4 steps forward, which puts me at positive 8. If I want to do negative 4 times 2, I'm still going to be facing the positive side of the number line because it's a positive 2. But this time I'll be taking two groups of 4 steps backwards because I'm taking steps of negative 4, um, which means I'm going to be going backwards. So here's one group of negative 4 backwards, and then here's another group of the negative 4 backwards, which puts me at negative 8. And so this shows why negative 4 times 2 equals negative 8. Then I can do a positive times a negative 2. So again, I'm starting at 0. But in this case, since I'm multiplying by negative 2, that means I'm going to be facing the negative side of the number line. And I'm going to be taking two groups of steps forward in that direction. And the reason why I'm taking them forward is because I have a positive 4. So the negative 2 tells me that I'm taking two groups of steps where I'm facing the negative direction. The positive 4 tells me that each one of those groups of steps is going to be like 4 steps forward in the direction I'm facing. So I take 4 steps forward, then another group of 4 steps forward, which puts me at negative 8 and shows that positive 4 times negative 2 equals negative 8. And then lastly, if I have negative 4 times negative 2, the negative 2 tells me I'm going to be facing in the negative direction. And I'm going to take two groups of steps, and the negative 4 tells me those groups of steps will include 4 steps backwards. So I take 4 steps backwards, and then another 4 steps backwards, and that puts me at positive 8. And so that shows me that negative 4 times negative 2 equals positive 8. And again, just like with addition and subtraction of integers, if you can come up with word problems that make these models more meaningful, that can help the students understand the concepts on a deeper level as well. So I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know, and I hope you have a good day.